task. Scaling the 12-foot-high defensive seawalls under enemy fire.
Well, this is Green Beach on Walmedo today. Not quite the same sight that would have greeted the first wave of US Marines as they clambered up the sea wall. With the second wave of Marines just 4 minutes behind, they quickly advanced inland, the landscape blackened and blasted by the covering fire. The Marines swept over the island, meeting limited resistance and suffering few casualties. In just 2 hours, the Marines' commander radioed the waiting fleet. Walmedo secured. Phase 1 of their mission had been accomplished. For the Marines, the battle had only just begun. As this tide retreated, it took with it the landing craft, their vital lifeline to the Allied ships out there. They had to dig in. For the next 12 hours, they had the unenviable task of defending the island against a possible counterattack. It was vital the Marines held their ground. Only if they retained control of this crucial island could further waves of landing craft move safely onto Incheon itself. They waited hour after hour for the tide to turn, waiting to defend against any North Korean counterattack. But the big attack never came. Only at 5:30 did the tide come back in, and conditions were again favourable for the next phase of the American landings further up the channel. Red Beach fell to the Marines with little resistance. But there was still one more beach to capture. Almost simultaneously, the Marines assaulted here at Blue Beach, about a mile south of Incheon. But things on Blue Beach didn't go quite as smoothly. Out to sea, 25 separate assault waves had formed, but as they approached the shore, many of them were swept wildly off course by the strong currents. The assault on Blue Beach was in disarray. Landing craft at risk of capsizing, men in danger of drowning. Those who did make it through found the beach choked with smoke from the earlier naval bombardment.
The actual landing conditions were terrible. The city was on fire, and the rain was mixing with the smoke and fire of the bombardment, so it was very difficult finding the beach. Some units got mixed up, landing on the wrong beaches, and we just had to get it all sorted out.
Despite the problems, there was no serious opposition to stop the Allied advance. They managed to push on through Incheon and further inland. Their journey took them eastwards, liberating village after village, rapidly crushing what little North Korean resistance they met. Their bold attack behind enemy lines had been a resounding success. In just 11 days, the men of the United Nations Army had reached their target and recaptured the South Korean capital, Seoul. The war in Korea was taking a whole new turn.
By now, the Allied forces pinned down inside the Busan perimeter had been reinforced with fresh battle-ready troops. They broke out and thrust north to join those who'd recaptured Seoul.
The United Nations forces could now attack the North Korean troops from two directions. Kim Il-sung's army was effectively surrounded and quickly collapsed.
Within just 2 weeks, the Allies had pushed the crumbling North Korean army back over the 38th parallel, back into North Korea. It was an incredible turnaround. The two Koreas were now back where they began, divided by the 38th parallel. The question for the UN allies was what to do next. The United Nations could have ended the war right there, but MacArthur wanted to press on. He didn't just want to kick communism out of South Korea, but crush it in North Korea as well. He said the North should pay the penalty for invading the South. He urged the United Nations to take the war across the border. At the end of September 1950, MacArthur got his way. He was given the go-ahead to cross the 38th parallel and push into North Korea. The UN army were no longer repelling an invasion. They had themselves become the invaders.
The Allied invasion of North Korea began very well. On October the 7th, the main body of the United Nations force drove northwards, and within a month they'd overrun the communist capital, Pyongyang. Still they pressed on, scattering any North Koreans who opposed them. The United Nations forces were now within reach of fulfilling MacArthur's vision of a total victory over communism and a united anti-communist Korea.
Word went around that MacArthur had even promised his troops would be home by Christmas, in a month's time.
But every step his men took north threatened to awaken a sleeping dragon.
MacArthur's troops were now fast approaching the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and Communist China. The Chinese leader, Mao Zedong, had been watching events in Korea. His new communist regime was only a year old and far from secure. Now the United Nations army was rapidly approaching his eastern border. As far as Mao was concerned, this was blatant imperialist aggression, and it had to be stopped. In September 1950, he ordered the Chinese People's Volunteer Army into North Korea. Led by Commander Pang De-Huai, their aim was to confront and crush the United Nations. The vast armies of China had joined the war.
Almost overnight, the men of the United Nations faced a very different enemy. The Chinese were tough. They were battle-hardened veterans of years of civil war, expert in close-quarters fighting and used to the rugged terrain. What really set them apart as a fighting force is that they were highly politicized. Each man had to sign a pledge of commitment to the cause, and each unit had to swear an oath to destroy imperialism.
They warned us if we didn't wipe out the enemy in Korea now, One day they will come back to China, and we will